Darryl, I feel like you teach on worldviews in a way that very few people do. It's not an abstract concept. It's not head knowledge or doctrine. It's very practical. It's the thing that has real impact, real consequence in our lives and in our cultures. This next session is called The Power of Story. Talk a little bit about the concept of worldview and what that means for you, how you unpack that in this session.
Well, my understanding of worldview occurred when I was at Liberty Fellowship. I'd never heard the word or phrase worldview before. Didn't know worldview existed. And I'll never forget an evening with Udo Mittelmann, a German lawyer. We were having supper together one evening in his home. And in the middle of the conversation, Udo turned to me and he said, Darryl, Christianity's true even if you don't believe it. Well, I'd been a Christian at that point for 13, 14 years. I'd been discipled in Campus Crusade for Christ, in Young Life. I'd been involved in a conservative evangelical church. I'd been to seminary. And I had been taught that Christianity was true because I believed it. And here's somebody telling me it's true even if I don't believe it. And that it caused a crisis in my faith. I didn't sleep for 2 nights. And I finally realized what he was saying to me. And what he was saying is that Christianity is true even if no one in the world believes it. And that was a profound revelation to me. And I came to realize that though I'd been a Christian all these years, I wasn't thinking like a Christian. I was thinking like a secularist. I'd grown up in the United States, been to public schools, watched television, watched movies, learned the language of secular materialism. So I had a born-again heart, but my mind was not born again. And that was a shock to me. And it was at that point that I came to realize that I had a worldview, and it wasn't a biblical worldview, but it was shaping everything about my life. Mm-hmm. In our case, coming from the West, I had a born-again heart, but an atheistic and materialistic mindset. And today, young Christians in the West, they don't have a modern mindset, they have a postmodern mindset. And it influences everything they think about life, including what it means to be a Christian, what the church is, what the role of the church in society is. All of these things are being shaped among the young in the West today by postmodernism. The older Christians that are our age in the West by modernism, and people in the developing world largely by an animistic framework.
Mm-hmm. And it's something you catch just by being a part of the culture.
That's right.
And if there's not a discipleship on the part of the church at that level, there's no change.
There's no change. Mm-hmm. And that's why coming to understand not only the concept, but the power of a worldview mm-hmm. is so important. And it's the reason that we need to disciple people, not just in the spiritual disciplines, but we need to disciple people at the level of culture. Because if people are not discipled at that level, they could have a born-again heart, but the mindset of the culture is what dominates their life.
I think that this lesson on worldview is probably one of my favorites. And I think one of the reasons it's one of my favorites, Darryl, is that I watch the faces of those that we teach. Mm. And it's in this lesson that they begin to wake up.
Yes.
Worldview, is such an esoteric word.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very abstract.
And some reason, God has given you the ability to be able to take this concept, which is very broad, and make it so clear and simple And it gives a classification system that allows the student to be able to understand their worldview vis-a-vis others.
Yes.
And not, with 54 varieties, but it summarizes it so that you can really grasp the concept of worldview and look at the comparisons of what the end consequences are of holding those various worldviews. And I've seen the lights go on
Yes.
so many times, and I love it. Sometimes kids study worldview and they come out with not really understanding
No.
what worldview is about or what the differences in different worldviews really are.
They think it's a statement of doctrine. Like if I just
Exactly.
memorize
Yes,
these 10
right.
points of doctrine, then I must have a Christian
Right.
worldview.
Yeah,
And yet what they function off of, what functions in terms of their decisions and guiding their life is something very different.
This is an important lesson.
I remember having a man from a seminary call us at the Disciple Nations Alliance because he was putting together a worldview, a list, sort of a worldview catalog of the different organizations that were working in worldview. He'd never heard of the DNA. But his son, who was working as a missionary in South America, and he was very familiar with what we taught and the impact that what the DNA was teaching, how it was impacting people in South America. And his son said, you need to call these guys at Disciple Nations Alliance. So he called and we chatted on the phone, and he said, I have talked to several hundred people who are leaders of organizations that focus on worldview. And he said, you are doing something different. And I said, what is that? And he said, you make worldview practical.